But how's everyone doing? Give me a wave. Awesome, brilliant. Good stuff. So I'm going to spend what was supposed to be the next 20 minutes, but I'm going to try and sort of nip-tuck it just a little bit, just because we're running a little bit sort of behind schedule. But I've got the privilege today of walking you through some of the findings and the insights from the 2024 Goals and Progress sort of survey tool. So we're going to show you some highlights. Of course, there's lots and lots of data, but in these short highlights, hopefully you'll get an indication of some of the progress that we're seeing across sort of the last 12 months. Now, all of you are involved in doing really brilliant work within your organisations. It's sort of you that are creating the conversations, making things happen. And it is about doing something great. And one of the things that I love about the Diversity Project is that we always lean into those things that sometimes can feel really uncomfortable, really difficult, challenges that are coming up, responding to the backlash to DE&I, the cognitive research that we're going to be doing. And it is about really leaning into those challenges and embracing them. And that's one of the things that I really, really love. So today I want to give you a quick insight into how the tool has developed in the last 12 months. And there have been a number of enhancements this year. And the first thing is that we've collaborated with the Oxford Brookes Business School and their Diversity and Policy Research Department, who have done a brilliant job in helping to restructure the survey. And our aim here is to make it much more robust, but also so we can take the stepping stones to developing the existing framework into an accreditation. So in Q1 next year, we're really pleased to be bringing together a cohort of members in a focus group as we work with you to develop the accreditation. And I should sort of point out is that the idea is that this is developed by you, with you, for members. So if you are interested in getting involved in that focus group and being one of the first as well to actually complete the accreditation with us, please do send us an email by the end of the year, and we'll make sure we'll get an invitation out to you. We really want to get your thoughts alongside us, so thank you. Okay, so the first thing I want to give you some perspective on is kind of the sample from this year. And what's really interesting to see is that 2/3 of respondents are small and medium-sized organisations. Again, really inspiring to see. We have got a very successful small sort of firms working group. So I think this really shines the light on the work that we need to do in that space. It's also exciting that this year we've had one more participant in the survey than we did last year. So little step forward, but we'll take it. And hopefully next year, again, we could increase that number further. And in terms of the sort of organisations represented in this year's sort of survey, you can see here the vast majority of organisations are within sort of the investment and asset management space. So yeah, real mixture of sort of small, medium-sized and some large firms, 84 participants, and a real big skew of investment and asset managers for this year. So it's been brilliant, actually, to see the amount of focus that diversity and inclusion data collection has really gathered over the last, I say last 2 years, really. And what we sort of saw in the last sort of 12 months is an increased focus across lots of different areas. One of the ones I'm most proud of, actually, is the move forward in terms of social mobility data collection. There's been lots of focus this year from the Diversity Project on this particular aspect of diversity and inclusion, whether it's the sort of social mobility toolkits, the Levelling the Playing Field campaign that we ran, and of course all the other works that are taking place as well. But it's true that this year we have moved forward from a social mobility perspective. And of course, as a leader of an LGBTQ+ organisation, amazing to see more sexual orientation data being sort of collected as well. But the thing I'm most excited about this year is just the variety of diversity inclusion data that organisations are collecting. And you can sort of see here there's been huge increases. If we look at when we asked this question in 2023, only 35 participants actually were able to answer this question. What we've seen in 2024 is that all respondents have been able to answer that question. You can see the number here. So all in all, the picture, I think, is definitely a positive one. I guess the caveat is we have got a slightly different sample, of course, from the one we had last year, so we need to be mindful of that with sort of the points that we're making. But progress has taken place across a number of different diversity inclusion dimensions. And remember, the tool is about monitoring the progress towards the goals, but it's also about collecting information now and relevant insights in other areas of diversity inclusion too, like disability, for example. So we have seen more and more organisations sort of going for the disability confidence scheme. The data does tell us that actually the intentionality around looking at this in the next 12 months is slightly less than it was sort of the year before. But I would say that the momentum that we've seen around the Disability Confidence Scheme, it has increased. So it does tell us that actually this is an area that we might want to push a little bit harder on next year, just to sort of ride off that momentum. Working families, again, some really interesting sort of points coming through here. One of the big findings here is that we're still quite a long way from getting parity between maternity and sort of paternity policies. And I think that sort of tells us something. So definitely need to look at that for next year. On the LGBTQ plus side of things, whoop whoop, we have seen a number of organisations complete a benchmarking exercise, and this is the thing I'm personally really excited about, is that as much as 60% of participants are saying actually this is going to be something that we look at in the next sort of 12 months ahead. So certainly really excited sort of by that. Menopause, the data gave us a bit of a mixed picture. On the one hand, we were seeing quite a low proportion of organisations signing up to the menopause pledge, but we have seen a lot of focus around looking at policy formation within this space. So kind of sort of contradictory, if you like. But the good news is that policies are going into organisations. This is a topic, this is an area that organisations are sort of really focused on. And then with flexible working, some really interesting insights, and I know we've got lots planned next year for sort of this space in terms of developing out work resources toolkits. But one point that did come through is that from all of the participants, only 2 organisations are mandating that employees come back into the office for the full 5 days per week. Now, I'm very glad I don't work for one of those organisations, but I think what it is telling us is that we're not seeing that sort of reversal back to sort of the prehistoric times of, before sort of COVID. So I was quite encouraged sort of by that sort of insight. Returners we need to take a look at, I think, a little bit more detail. And again, the data sort of suggests to us this sort of last 12 months has been a little retraction in sort of organisations supporting returners programmes. We're unsure why that is. We possibly think it could be just that recruitment has been sort of quite constrained. There's been less hiring happening with everything that's going on in the wonderful markets and less hires. But something for us to really take a look at as we move into sort of 2025. Now, the great news is that the commitment to the gender goals has really increased over the last sort of 12 months. So just to remind you what those beautiful goals are, you can see them there just on sort of the right. But we're aspiring for 20% female fund managers. We want to close that gender pay gap by 1/3. And we want to achieve the 50-50 male to female recruitment at entry level. So I'm pleased to report that the commitment to the goals has definitely increased in sort of the last 12 months. We can see here, not just committing to one goal, but multiple goals. Of course, there's still a lot further to go. And I think for that reason, one of the things that we're going to be exploring is how can we support organisations to adopt more of the goals? So that's definitely a question for us for next year. It's also true we've seen some amazing actions taking place. So I think that's 58% of organisations taking actions to support gender inclusion. A lot of focus on creating safe spaces for women as well. And of course, we've got the menopause sort of point that came through with the 17% of organisations that have committed to the pledge. So I think we need to push a little bit just on the pledge and get more happening with regards to that, particularly given we've had 55% of organisations that have invested in developing a policy and implementing one in the last 12 months as well. So with accountability, we are starting to see some good results here. So we've got 63% of organisations that are actively reporting sort of publicly on the sort of the gender pay gap. So we've got a little bit of work to do there. One of the things I think we need to do as an organisation, as a diversity project, is to really think about what are the best practices? What is the process for implementing gender pay gap mechanisms within our organisation? Because we've clearly got 63% of members doing it. So let's find out how they've done it, what's worked, what's not, and then let's bring that best practice to the other 37% that haven't quite got there yet. And then on sort of progress, overall, the data just does suggest to us we have seen a slight narrowing of the gender pay gap. There's, of course, still a long way to go. I think one of the things that we should look at for next year is really accelerating the participation in sort of the pathway programme, because we know that the long and short answer to getting and closing that sort of gender pay gap, of course, is getting more women into the front office, into those departments and roles that are the engine room of the economy, that pay the most in terms of sort of compensation. So it just goes to show really that the pathway programme and making more female fund managers is a really important priority for the industry. So let's flip over and have a little look at what we're seeing in terms of social mobility. And in terms of the sort of actions and focus, social mobility is the highest ranking, actually, dimension out of social mobility, gender, race and ethnicity this year. So we've flipped round. Traditionally, we see most of the activity happening on gender. And it just goes to show, right, if you put your focus on something, what you can achieve. So, huge credits to all of the folks that have been involved with the social mobility work in the last sort of 12 months. And again, just to give you a reminder, you can see, see the goals there. And let's show you some of the sort of the data points. So massive increase here, huge increase in the sort of the commitments to the goals. Again, we want to be really enhancing that as we move forward. Let's build on that momentum to get more organisations, sort of signed up to those goals. We've seen some really interesting sort of points coming through in actions as well. So you can see 76% of organisations taking positive action around sort of social mobility, compared to 58% for gender and 73% for race and ethnicity. But really great statistic, 58% of organisations have added social mobility to their DE&I agendas within their organisations. So we've definitely achieved lift in the last sort of 12 months with regards to this area as well. In terms of accountabilities, we can see here some of the things that are sort of shining through. Great sort of progress forward in terms of the collection of diversity inclusion data. Massive shout out to the toolkit that the diversity projects developed for the social mobility sort of piece. And again, that is being really influential and informative, within lots of different member firms. So good to see as well. And then on the progress side of things, it's absolute fact. We're getting more social economic data coming through. We're seeing action, across different social mobility initiatives. And all in all, I think it's really important now that we turn our focus to the entry level sort of recruitment piece, because we're a little bit patchy this year in terms of the data that came through on this particular sort of indicator. And in short, not a lot of organisations actually answered this question. So we need to find out a little bit more about why that is. Is it because actually hiring was more constrained in the last 12 months due to market conditions? But again, a little bit more for us to sort of look in there. And then finally, race and ethnicity. So more firms than ever before have achieved the 90% race and ethnicity target. We've, of course, seen some new goals in 2024 be added prior to the development of the survey, I will add. So there's going to be a few gaps yet in sort of the data points here. But yeah, 3 new goals for the race and ethnicity workstream set this year. So let's sort of take a quick look. So we've seen commitment to the goals. We've got 41% of participating firms now that have got to that, that 90%, which is brilliant. And of course, we'll have some data for you next year on sort of the other 3 goals as well. As with the other dimensions, more support to adopt the goals, definitely sort of a key theme. I mentioned before, we've got 73% of organisations that are taking sort of race and ethnicity sort of DE&I actions to improve the situation in their organisation. I think joining up initiatives in this space. One of the things that I've sort of noticed is we've got so many brilliant initiatives sort of taking place. I think there is an opportunity to really bring those together. So that's going to be something that we look to do in sort of 2025. And then accountabilities. So I mentioned before the new addition of sort of the ethnicity pay gap reporting, as you can see there in goal 4. The reality is not many organisations are doing this. Around 25% of participants are currently sort of doing this at the moment. So I think what we really need to get progress happening at like an individual sort of firm level is that we bring together a cohort of really sort of senior exec sponsors in these organisations to really get this onto the conversation table. It might be something we can achieve as well, of course, via the advisory council. So a little bit of other themes for you here. So developing best practices on ethnicity pay gap reporting. Again, this is quite a new thing for our industry. Out of the realms of this survey, I know Schroders have done a brilliant job at doing that and have been through a process. So again, how do we share that best practice and that learning and really sort of bring it all together? So they're my key insights for you today. That's a complete whistle-stop tour of the Diversity Project 2024 in 10 minutes. I have made 5 minutes back, top marks. And I hope it's giving you an insight into some of the things that have been taking place over the last 12 months. And I think we should all be proud, and you should all be proud of the work and the progress that we have seen. I'm really optimistic for next year. And it was fantastic to see the comments coming through around how do we view DE&I? Do we think it's more important, less important? And the overwhelming messaging sort of coming through, although we are preaching to the converted in this room, is that it is still important. And that's one of the things that I'm really seeing and hearing too. And despite all of the, the backlash and the stuff that we are sort of hearing, leaders, organisations are still wanting to do the right thing by their people. And I think that's going to be a trend that we sort of continue to see. So just finally, if you are interested in getting involved in the accreditation, info@thediversityproject.com, please drop us an email. We'd love to have you involved to go on this journey and this sort of pilot with us. And thank you for listening. And yeah, wishing you all a brilliant weekend. Thank you.